Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, November 16th Economic Development Commission for the City of Burnsville. At this time, I would like to have an approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda.
I second.
Jeff, second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay, approval of the minutes from the July 13th, 2016 EDC meeting. Any questions? Motion for approval.
So moved.
Jeff?
Second.
Sandra, second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign. Great. Motion carries. Legislative agenda. Hey, good afternoon, Jenny.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. This is something I usually see you at least once a year for this item, if not something else. So, as you know, every year the council approves their legislative agenda. What we try to do is bring this to you before their adoption, but we didn't have a meeting, what was it, last month or the month before? So council has already adopted this. Certainly if there's any comments or questions, let me know and we'll pass those along. If there's any ideas for next year, we'll certainly make sure that those get included. And the council will be meeting with our legislators. I believe it's at the December work session. If not, it would be the January one. So the items that are related to economic development, I just pulled out a few of them. The full 6 or 7 page legislative priority list is on the website if you're interested in that, but I just included the ones in the background that are related to economic development. And the first category we have is legislative priorities, and these are items that the council has given directives to be actively pursuing. So these are more than just responding and providing a comment. These are things that we're actively working on. There are, I think, 3 or 4 of them this year. First one on the list is closure of freeway landfill. This was on the list last year as well. So the city continues to work with our partners at the county, the MPCA, and now the EPA is involved at the federal level to get freeway landfill closed. And the priority is that it's closed in an environmentally sustainable manner. There's some issues with proximity to the river, and then also that it create economic development opportunities for the city. So those are the priorities for the city in getting this cleaned up. Also a part of this priority gets to tax increment financing, economic development tools that are available in the Minnesota River Quadrant area. And last year we worked to get our special legislation extended. In 2008, the city got some special legislation regarding tax increment financing that covers the Minnesota River Quadrant. That is set to expire in 2017. So we went to get an extension and it was approved but not signed into law by the governor. So we'll be working on that again. And that gives us some flexibility on how we can create districts and how we can use some of those funds given all the problems that are in there. So we need to get that extended, but that does fall under this one. Any questions on the landfill? I'll just kind of go through these one by one.
Sure.
Yeah.
What has to happen for it to close? Why does it have to go through a legislative body to close down?
Well, the reason why it's on the city's legislative priority is because there's gonna be a lot of state dollars that will go into this to provide the funding for it to be closed. So the regulations are all in place, but how does that closure get paid for is not fully funded. So certainly we would support a plan that gets to the closure and then that the funds are in there for the environmental sensitive manner and that there is some economic development opportunity.
Sure.
I could go on and on if you want. On the property owner, the short story also is the property owner needs to sign an agreement with the MPCA that would, it's called a binding agreement that would kind of start down the road of closure. And the parties have not been able to come to agreement, so now the EPA is involved.
So when they, I'm sorry to follow up. So when they close it down, they're looking for to contain the waste, basically? Is that what the?
Correct. The current freeway landfill, I want to say it's about 140 acres. It is not an unlined, it's not a lined facility. So with our water table levels, the proximity to the river, stuff that's going on with the quarry pumping water, there's a potential for future contamination when the quarry stops pumping. So something needs to happen with this landfill so that the Minnesota River is not contaminated and our drinking water is safe. That's the priority. So we still have time to work on a solution. There's no immediate problem, but we need to figure out how to mitigate the hazard before it becomes one. Good question. Okay? Moving on, then we have the supporting position statements, and these are positions that the council has said that we support legislative action in these items. This may be something that we send a letter on, or we may be asked to testify at the legislature on. The first one is a new one. This relates to massage therapy establishments. We have several in the city. This past year, the city decided to start regulating or licensing individual massage therapists as opposed to establishments. So there's different, most cities have some kind of licensing ordinance, but the criteria vary from city to city. So one city may be more strict on education or experience, on the number, they may have limits and different criteria that they have. So it gets a little challenging for people who are in the industry to try to work in different cities because the licensing criteria are different. And so what we're supportive of, and legislation was introduced last session that would have a statewide standard for licensure and practice, similar to liquor licenses and tobacco licenses, where there's a standard that's set by the state and it's administered at the local level. So this levels the playing field, makes it, I guess, more fair across the state and easier for these folks to do business. Then we have preservation of the host community economic development grant program. This is a grant that's been in effect 3 years. And this was put into place to help offset economic losses that communities that have active landfills in. When those landfills were put into place, cities were allowed to collect a certain amount of money called host agreements. With implementation of higher recycling rates, there's less garbage going into the landfill, which means those cities are getting less host fee dollars. And those host dollars are dollars meant to offset higher and better uses of those landfills. Nobody wants a landfill in their community, but the statutory authority to allow cities to have tipping fees, host fees, was a way to offset what those other uses could be. So with more garbage going into recycling, there's less host dollars coming to communities. This grant program was set up to help those cities kind of offset the reduction in host fees due to increased recycling. We've applied for that grant 3 years in a row, and we've received funds, $450,000, Skip can correct me here if I'm wrong, $450,000 every 2 years?
Yes. The legislation approved 900,000 per year, and we're typically right around 400,000 each year that we get.
So we've applied for and had projects the last 3 years. So this is something that helps the MRQ. We've got a Cliff Road project on the horizon, Lady Bird Lane, DuPont improvements right in the MRQ that we're using these host dollars for to help with economic development initiatives in the area. So anyways, we support preservation of those dollars because of the impacts of the landfill and reduction of host fees in our community. Any questions on either of these two?
So I have a quick question on that, Jenny. So at the point that the landfill is closed, it's going to be a while before the tax base reestablishes the taxes or the income that's coming off the landfill, I presume. Is this program critical to bridging that gap as well?
Commissioner, I would say we're talking about, this relates to the active landfill, Burnsville Sanitary Landfill, not the closed freeway landfill. Once the landfill is closed, the city, we get no economic benefit. You can't build on them unless they're designed. We've got our landfills designed to have a golf course on it, so there's some recreational benefit that comes of it. So there will be some tax base from it, but not as if it were buildings that could be put on it, for instance, that would have a much higher tax value. So this is meant to offset the current tipping fees and host fees that we get while the landfill's operational, to pay for detriment to our roads, lost economic opportunity, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know I was jumping ahead a little bit, but to me, I was wondering if they were related at all.
Yeah, I don't really
okay.
think so.
Okay.
I have a question on the massage therapy establishments. Did you say Burnsville just passed a licensing last year?
We modified it. Commissioner, we modified, we've had massage licenses on the books at least a decade, if not 2 decades. But it was modified. It used to be where we licensed the establishment, and those therapists that worked there were registered. So the establishment was held accountable. Most cities license the individual, so you're an individual massage therapist. You can go from a doctor's, you know, a chiropractor's office, to a massage business, to a hair salon, you know, a lot of them travel and work for at different places or out of their home. So I had, I think, about 2 work sessions where the massage folks came in and talked to the city council about this. And it was, I think, almost their idea that we register or license the individual instead of the business, because we were looking at more increased background checks and how do we make sure those that are actually practicing are doing so with the best of intentions for business operations, so.
Did everyone have to, is it a yearly thing, or are people that have already established have to get grandfathered in?
It's an annual
You
license.
have to do an annual thing? Okay.
Correct.
Good.
Okay, we've got 2 more supporting position statements. The number 3 relates to development and redevelopment. This is the same as was on there last year. This is getting to, the city opposes the elimination or reduction of tools that we have, and we support innovative tools. Other states have different economic development tools. Some states have local income taxes that are collected to the local jurisdictions. We don't have that, so we don't have that incentive, but certainly the state does. The state collects income taxes, so we would support some kind of economic development program that would rebate income taxes for jobs that are created to the company, something like that, something that's innovative, that keeps us competitive with other states. And then on the local land use front, this is a position that's long been in our legislative policies. And this is that the city opposes legislation that reduces or eliminates local control. The council believes land use decisions should be made in this room by them and not by folks down in St. Paul. And we certainly have something that comes up, I would say, at least once a year. Something pops up in this category where we have to respond to, and it always comes down to local control. So are there any questions on this one? Okay. Transportation, we support transportation funding and tools that meet our long and short-term needs, and we also included language this time around that relates to the Orange Line bus rapid transit, and that funds be made available to that. That's in the city council's ends and outcomes, that we have an Orange Line here, that it comes to Burnsville, and we support the tools that would make that happen. And then broadband, the city supports the broadband task force. This is more of a regional policy that the state not fall behind compared to other states for economic competitiveness, that we have broadband, and we support the efforts of the state in that regard. How am I doing? Okay, so if there's no questions on that, then the last category that we have is monitoring and tracking of position statements. These are things that we're just kind of keeping an eye on, just to make sure there's no changes. Things do get brought up along the way whenever the legislature's in session. The first one is that we oppose any legislation that would create additional classes of property taxation or increase taxation levels on the present state property tax. That certainly is, from an economic development standpoint, taxes are important. And on the transportation side, we support any additional funding for transportation and local tools that meet our region, and that also includes maintenance. There's been a lot of talk about our bridges and bridges being replaced and maintenance of our roads. We want to make sure the state has money to maintain their roads that we have already. And I think that's the long and the short of the positions here that we have that are related to economic development. And I'll stand for any further questions on that.
Just curious, how do you come up with this list? How does that all start? What's the process behind it?
The process is, so we have the full legislative priorities that are carried over from year to year. We will update them once a year with the council. If there's something that comes up that we need help on or a directive, we may check in with council at a work session. The massage, for instance, was introduced by another city at the last session, and it's like, should we support this or not support this? Of course, it was something our police department and our licensing folks thought we should get behind. Makes a lot of sense, so then we added that this year. The freeway landfill, now that the EPA is involved, so that just needed updating to have the most current language. So I would say there's maybe 1 or 2 new items that are added every year, maybe 1 or 2 that come off where legislative has passed or has been defeated or won't come back, or maybe it's moved to monitor instead of the active position. Okay. It's almost a living, breathing document. And then new things will pop up where it's not in here at all, and we gotta do something about it, so.
Is it somebody's job to track these as they come through the legislator?
The city has an administrative services director. Her name is Dana Hardy, so she's kind of the keeper of this list. And if you go online and look at this list, there are various staff people's names that are assigned to this. So when something does come up, she's not responsible for keeping an eye on all these. Certainly, we as department heads and the management team is responsible for this. So stuff that's related to economic development, Skip and I are in the know on that, and then we'll help our lobbyists or our legislators answer those questions. The city manager is very heavily involved in this, in dealing especially with the legislators and our partners on this too. That's a good question.
It's interesting, yeah. Thank you.
I had a question as well. So the street improvement district, you're lobbying for legislation to allow cities to do that. I presume that we don't do that now, or it's not approved to be able to do that. It maybe is the way, if I read this right, it's not approved yet to do that.
That's correct.
But is the hope then to be able to do this is that there's more openness and accountability to the actual money going into streets versus being bundled in the overall operating expenses, or what's the hope there?
Commissioner, this was legislation that has been raised by other cities, and the city is a member city of the League of Minnesota Cities, and that is a lobbying group that works on behalf of cities. So they also have legislative positions that are, there must be 150 of them or so on different committees. So this got brought up and is supported by the league. And so we talked about it, the Burnsville City Council talked about it, and it's my understanding, it's not a tool, the Special Service District for roads and street improvements is not necessarily something that the Burnsville Council supports, but they do support having tools in the toolbox. So if they wanted to, they could at some point, but you're exactly right, it gets to transparency on where the dollars are coming and going from for transportation improvements.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Jenny.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Good to see you all.
All right, Skip, for review of the establishment of the tax increment financing district number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The district that we are talking about creating will actually be a one-parcel district. It will be our 8th district. You can see it outlined on your screens in red. It sits at Portland Avenue, directly across the street from the Burnsville High School. And the developer looking at developing this parcel is a firm by the name of Industrial Equities. They have done a number of buildings in Burnsville. They own the building that is on the south side of 13 across from the high school. They do a very, very good product. They maintain their product very well. You'll note that their buildings always are well landscaped, and typically they have pretty decent tenancy retention. They are proposing somewhere between a 70,000 and 110,000 office warehouse building. It will not be a spec building, and that's why there's a difference in the square footage. They are actually looking for a single tenant or possibly 2 tenants, and then we'll build the building to suit once they secure that tenant or tenants. The property has some topographical issues. It basically is a hill, and that is actually the reason for the request of the business subsidy is to help offset the cost of doing that development. They are estimating that it's going to cost them about $750,000 to bring the parcel up to a development state. And they are anticipating that they will secure a tenant or tenants and start construction hopefully in the spring, if not the summer of next year. The proposal is to create what's known as an economic development district. The district would meet the state criteria as having a warehouse on it. Depending on the square footage of the building, we would be looking at TIF anywhere from $285,000 to $624,000. We obviously will not know the exact amount of the TIF available to the developer until we have the building size and we know what they're going to build. An economic development district is a payout over 9 years. In Burnsville, we use what is called a pay-go system, which means we only pay the increment out to the developer after their taxes are paid each year or each 6-month cycle, as opposed to making the payment up front to them and then having to monitor that they actually perform on all the parts of their contract. The value of the parcel right now is $710,000. At 110,000 square foot building, the estimated value would be about 5.5 million. So it obviously is going to be a good addition to our tax base. Staff would be recommending that the EDC recommends that the council and the EDA adopt this district. We believe it develops a challenging parcel. It'll increase our tax base, and it'll increase our jobs here in Burnsville. And Mr. Chair, I would certainly stand for questions at this time.
So what percent of the parcel is developable as it sits now? Is the entire parcel need
Yes,
fill?
yes, Mr. Chair.
Any,
Isn't there a cemetery right there? How far away from the cemetery are we?
This piece of land was actually owned by the cemetery.
Okay.
And it's also, WUFTA and all of those businesses were pieces of cemetery land at one time. And this is a last parcel that they had available. Obviously, the reason this one sat available is because of the issues to develop it. And Mr. Allen, who is the principal of Industrial Equities, has looked at it, has looked at the location, believes it's a very good location, right off of 13, close to 35W by the high school, and believes that with some assistance, he can put a nice, 70 to 110,000 square foot building on there with a good tenant.
were the other parcels given any sort of TIF, or they weren't the challenges?
They did not have the challenges, and they did not have any TIF.
I was just gonna say, this is like one of the last parcels available for a building like this.
There are very few parcels left in Burnsville, and almost every single one of them has some sort of either topographical issue, or, as we've talked about before, down in the MRQ, we have the peat issue down there, which many of those got cleaned up with excess dirt from 5 and 13 project.
What's the likelihood that they would develop it if there was no TIF?
The developer has told us that they would not develop it, and we were in discussions with them prior to the purchasing of the property, and they said that they would not want to purchase it if they didn't think there was a good opportunity to get some subsidy to help them out. In all likelihood, they would, if the TIF district was not created, they'd probably put the parcel back on the market.
So to that point, is it an unfair advantage if we pay for more than what normal correction costs would be?
We would not.
Meaning that if it's $750,000 to correct it, and the total TIF potential is $624,000.
That's all we would pay.
But what I'm saying is, if it was a good parcel, and they were to develop it, any idea what correction costs would run on just a parcel that was in relatively good shape, overall land?
It's going to vary, Commissioner, on the size of the parcel and everything else. It certainly would not be probably close to that 750.
No, I wouldn't expect, yeah.
You don't have any idea how many jobs we're talking here, do you?
Again, without
Just
knowing the
depends.
tenant, we can't really speculate on that.
I think it sounds like a great idea, just for opinion.
So, and we're looking for a motion, correct?
That's correct. You would need a motion to recommend.
You like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend the decision, the TIF for District 8.
Can I ask one more question? Is there a limit in how many TIF districts we can have
No.
within the city? No, it's unlimited? Okay. I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Thank you, Commissioners.
With that, this concludes the November 16th Economic Development Commission of the City of Burnsville. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.